The rain was heavy that night. It fell in cold sheets over the stone streets of Veyrath, the capital city of the Iron Moon Kingdom. The shops were closed. The lanterns along the palace road flickered and bent in the wind. Most people were inside, warm and dry, behind locked doors. But not Alara. She was curled against the palace wall, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, her soaked clothes pressed flat against her skin. She was shaking, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion, the deep, hollow kind that comes from running for too long with nothing left to run on. A small locket hung around her neck. It was the only thing she owned that she had never let go of. Not once, in 3 years of having nothing. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the wolf-shifter world. No pack, no protection, no name that anyone recognized. In the world she lived in, that meant she was invisible, and invisible people were easy to hurt. She closed her eyes. She did not expect anything to change. Then the palace gates opened. She did not hear footsteps at first. She only heard the creak of iron, and then silence, and then a voice, low, calm, and carrying more authority than she had ever heard in her life, said, "Bring her inside." She opened her eyes. A man stood a few feet away. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing with no crown on his head, but everything about him, the way he stood, the way the guards snapped to attention without being told, made it clear who he was. King Calum Draveth, the Alpha King of the Iron Moon Kingdom. He was not looking at her with pity. He was not looking at her with disgust. He was simply looking at her, silver eyes steady, as if he had been expecting to find her there. She tried to stand and could not. 2 guards stepped forward and helped her carefully. She was too tired to be afraid yet. That would come later. She woke up in a bed so soft she thought, for a moment, that she had died. The room was warm. There was a fire going. A woman in pale robes, a healer, was sitting beside her, and she looked up when Alara's eyes opened and said, quietly, "You're safe. Rest." Alara did not believe her, but she was too weak to argue. The next morning, the king came. He entered alone, which surprised her. No guards. No advisors. He pulled a chair close and sat down and looked at her, the way people rarely looked at Omegas, like she was a full person, not a problem to be dealt with. "Who hurt you?" he asked. She said nothing. She had learned, a long time ago, that answering that question only made things worse. He did not push her. He did not raise his voice or tell her she owed him an answer, because he had brought her in from the rain. He simply nodded, slowly, and said, "You can stay here until you are well. After that, the choice is yours." She stared at him. No one had ever said that to her before. "The choice is yours." She stayed. The weeks that followed were strange and quiet. The palace was enormous, full of marble floors and tall windows, and people who had spent their whole lives around power. Most of them looked at Alara like she did not belong there, which was true. She was an Omega with no pack, no rank, and no explanation for why the king had taken her in. The whispers followed her down every corridor. She did not let them reach her. She had survived worse than whispers. She found the palace library on her 4th day, and did not leave it willingly after that. It was 3 floors tall, with shelves that went all the way to the ceiling, and a smell of old paper and wood that made her feel, for the first time in years, something close to calm. She organized, she cataloged, she worked quietly and carefully, and asked for nothing. The king's council was not quiet about their objections. She heard them, once, through a half-open door, words like inappropriate and security risk and what does he think he's doing? She heard Calum's response too. It was very short. It was enough to end the conversation. He visited the library more than she expected a king would. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she realized he was coming specifically during the hours she was there. He would pull a book from a shelf, sit at the long reading table, and read. Sometimes they did not speak at all for an hour. It was not uncomfortable. That surprised her. One afternoon he was reviewing a record from an old border war and made a quiet comment about the dates. Alara, without thinking, said, "That's wrong. The Southern campaign started 2 weeks earlier. The record is missing a skirmish that changed the whole outcome." There was a pause. She looked up and found him watching her. She apologized immediately. "Don't," he said. "Show me." She showed him. He listened. He asked questions. He treated her correction not as an embarrassment, but as useful information. When he left that evening, he thanked her. She stood alone in the library for a long moment after that, not quite sure what to do with the feeling that settled in her chest. Then Lord Brennan Kale arrived at the palace. He came representing the Ashvale Pack, under the official reason of political discussions. He was polished and confident, and said all the right things in the right rooms. The court liked him immediately. He was the kind of man who knew how to be liked. Alara saw him for the first time in a corridor near the East Wing, and she turned around before he could see her face. Her heart was hammering. Her hands were cold. She knew that name. She knew that family. She did not know exactly why. Her memories from before the age of 5 were fragmented, broken things, but her body knew. It recognized danger the way an animal recognizes fire. That evening, she packed her few belongings. She made it as far as the front gate, before Calum appeared. He was not chasing her. He was simply standing there, as though he had known. He looked at her bag, and then at her face, and he asked, "What are you running from that found you here?" The question broke something open in her. She cried, not dramatically, not loudly, just tears that came without permission, because she was so tired, and because no one had ever asked her that before. Not, "What are you running to?" Not, "Who told you to leave?" But, "What found you?" She did not answer, but she let him walk her back inside. 3 nights later, a fire broke out in the East Wing of the palace. It moved fast and deliberately, the way fires only move when they are helped. In the chaos, people were shouting and running, and in the confusion, someone struck Alara from behind, not hard enough to hurt badly, but enough to make her stumble. The locket tore free from her neck. Calum caught it before it hit the ground. He almost handed it back immediately, but it had sprung open in his hand, and he looked down at what was inside before he could stop himself. A miniature crest, small, precise, unmistakably the Silvermark. The royal seal of the Aurelian dynasty. He went very still. He knew that crest. He had been a boy when the Aurelian royal family was destroyed in a single violent night 14 years ago, a massacre blamed on internal rebellion, though the full truth had always felt incomplete. The entire bloodline had been wiped out, every member confirmed dead. Except one, the infant daughter of the Aurelian king, never found, a loose thread that powerful people had spent years pretending did not exist. He looked up at Alara. She was watching him. She had seen the locket open. She had seen his face change. She was very still, the way people go still when they have been waiting for a moment for a very long time, and it has finally arrived. "Alara," he said quietly. "That's not my name," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands were shaking. It never was. He asked her to come with him. She did. They sat in a private room with the doors closed, and she told him everything. Her real name was Seren Aurelian. She had been 5 months old when the palace fell. A court physician, a man who had served her father loyally for 20 years, had taken her in the dark, wrapped her in plain cloth, and run. He had used old and painful pack magic to suppress her true nature, to make her present as an Omega instead of what she actually was, so that anyone looking for the Aurelian heir would look at her and see only a low-ranking girl with no significance. He had raised her as his own child, in a series of small towns, moving every few years, telling her pieces of the truth as she grew old enough to carry them. 3 years ago, they had found him. She had come home to their small house at the edge of a village to find him gone, and a message scratched into the floor in his handwriting. "Run, don't stop, don't come back for me." She never saw him again. She had run for 3 years, safe houses that stopped being safe, strangers who helped and then grew afraid and turned away. A slow journey toward nowhere, burning through every option, until a rainy night left her with nothing but a wall to lean against, and a locket pressed to her chest. She had not come to the palace on purpose. She had simply had nowhere else to fall. Calum listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The people who killed your family." Do you know who gave the order? She looked at him. The Ashvale Pack, she said. Lord Kale's family. The silence after that was different, harder. Brennan recognized me, she said. In the corridor. I saw his face. Calum stood up. What happened next was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet and certain, which was more frightening to those involved. Calum summoned his head of security that same night. He had Brennan Kale's rooms searched and found, hidden carefully in a false bottom of a travel case, a sealed message that had not yet been sent. Instructions to a contact outside the city, describing Alara's location and appearance, and asking for quick action. Brennan was escorted out of the palace before sunrise. In the morning, Calum stood before the Iron Moon High Council and presented everything. The locket, the physician's sealed records that Calum's people had located and retrieved from a protected archive, and Saren herself. He presented her not as a ward, not as a guest, but as the surviving heir of the Aurelian dynasty, and he named the Ashvale Pack formally, before the council, as the architects of the Aurelian massacre. Some council members were shocked, a few were not, and their lack of surprise was its own kind of answer. Calum named those people too. What followed was not a quiet political process. The Ashvale Pack moved armed forces toward the capital within days. It was a desperate move, the action of people who had spent 14 years building power on a foundation that was now cracking, but desperation makes people dangerous. There was a battle. It was hard, and real, and costly. Calum fought at the front of his forces, and his people fought with him, and something was shifting in the air around all of it, because Saren was no longer taking suppressants, and the old magic that had buried her true nature for 20 years was breaking down. She did not stay behind. When she appeared at the edge of the battlefield, her presence changed the air in a way that was difficult to explain. An alpha female, a true-born one, the rarest rank that existed, carried a weight that people felt before they saw her. His soldiers straightened. The Ashvale forces hesitated. It was not a power she performed. It was simply what she was, finally allowed to exist without a lid pressed down on top of it. She fought, not recklessly, but with the clear and focused movement of someone who had been surviving against the odds for 3 years, and had learned to be very good at it. Brennan Kale was captured before the fighting ended. Saren was the one who decided what happened to him, and would have understood if she had wanted swift justice. But she looked at Brennan, this man whose family had destroyed hers, who had spent years hunting a child who had done nothing wrong, and she said, trial, full and public, everything on record, no quiet endings. Because she wanted the truth to be the loudest thing in the room, not the revenge. Brennan was taken into official custody. The trial came later, and it was long, and it was thorough, and it put 14 years of hidden history into the public record, where it could never be quietly buried again. In the weeks that followed, the Iron Moon Kingdom formally recognized Saren Aurelian. Her dynasty could not be rebuilt. Too many years, too much loss. But her name was returned to her. Her family's history was corrected in the official records. A small stone monument was raised at the site of the old Aurelian palace, with her father's name on it, and her mother's, and the names of every person who had died that night. Saren stood in front of it for a long time on the day it was unveiled. Calum stood beside her. Not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. He did not speak. Sometimes the most respectful thing a person can do is simply be present. Afterward, walking back through the palace grounds in the early evening light, he asked her quietly if she was thinking about leaving. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about the alley in the rain, the locket in his hand, the library, and the long quiet afternoons, and the way he had asked her, "What are you running from?" instead of, "Why did you come here?" She thought about a man who had gone to war, not to own her story, but to make sure it survived. "I've been running for 14 years, she said. "I think I'd like to stop." He nodded, and they kept walking. The palace scribe, writing the official record for that season, closed his entry with a single sentence that no one asked him to add, but that everyone, when they read it, agreed was accurate. The Alpha King did not save her. He simply made sure the world did not get to erase her again.